All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Adorama 42 Live with Susan Stripling, Canon Explorer of Light. And so tonight is going to be really nice. Welcome to Adorama. Hang on. See, that's what I was waiting for. I was waiting for the delay. Sorry about that, guys. So again, it happened. I was waiting. So everybody welcome, and sorry about that little hang up there, but I will be in the chat tonight answering any of the questions that you might have tech related, and I will be saving the rest for Susan towards the end of that. And so please feel free to interact in the chat. Now, to do so, you need to log into your YouTube account to be able to get access to the chat. So if you don't have an account, make one real quick so you can join us in the chat. And with all that said, I'm going to hand it off to Susan so she can get started, and I'm going to jump in the chat. So I'll see you guys there.
Sweet. Yeah, and feel free to honestly ask me any questions that you might have. Like she said, she's going to hold the questions till the very end, but I'd rather you ask them as you think them instead of try to hold on to them and then forget them. You can also ask me pretty much anything you want. Doesn't necessarily entirely have to be completely related to what we're talking about. Would be helpful if it were, but if you have any burning other questions, please let me know. So, as stated, my name is Susan Stripling. I am a wedding photographer primarily. That's about 85% of my income. I also photograph elopements, engagements, proposals, portraits, commercial work, theater, a little bit of everything that comes along. But what has paid the bills consistently year after year since I got started was weddings. And when I got started with weddings, I thought that flash was terrifying. I thought that you put your flash on your camera and put it on ETTL, and that's just where it lived. And you only took your flash off if you were super fancy, or if you were Lindsay Adler working in the studio or something like that. But over time, more and more with weddings, I would find myself in scenarios where I either didn't have the light that I wanted, or I had the light that I wanted, but it wasn't in the right spot, or there was too much light, or there was not enough light, or so many questions. And I kept having to adapt these visions that I had for photography to the limitations of the light in front of me. And I just kept thinking, I just wish I could take the sun with me wherever I went. And that led to thinking, well, why can't I? So I started off really simply, just learning off-camera flash with one speed light. I went to Zach Arias's One Light workshop ages and ages ago and learned really exciting things about inverse square laws and exactly how many meters away your flash went from this power to this power, and we did math, and it was a lot. But I did learn a lot about placement of flash and how to use it. I first started using it mostly for reception lighting, and now I use it an awful lot for portraits. To be clear, my favorite type of lighting is natural light. I always want to find light from the sun or a window or some sort of beautiful light source to use first and foremost. But if that's not there, now I have all of the tools that I need. Excuse me. Oh, also to clarify, if I start coughing, I am so sorry. I have a lot of water over here, but I'm getting over a sinus thing. So I'll try to not cough straight into the microphone. We're going to see how this goes. So we're going to jump in. And before I start showing you, I have lighting diagrams for you. I have all kinds of things for you. I want to talk about the gear, because that's kind of the natural first question is, what sort of gear do you use to make the images that you make? So my primary cameras are the Canon EOS R5s. I have two of them. They are my favorite cameras in the entire world. They're actually sitting right here. I don't use them with battery packs. I absolutely love the battery packs. It makes it way more efficient. I don't have to change batteries during the event, but it also makes it heavier. And that's not a problem until you're shooting a really long wedding day and you're carrying all that gear on your body, which I carry. I use a kind of a suspender holster system, and any extra bit of heft on that, you definitely feel it. I didn't feel it so much in the early days of my career, but I'm 45 now and everything hurts the next day. So we try not to do that. But you can see on the bottom here, I have a Arca Swiss plate down here. And the reason why that's here is so that I can hook my little RL Handcrafts thing on it so that it hangs on my suspenders. But I also have a Peak Design hand strap on it. In the event that I'm not going to have it attached to my harness, or if I'm just free carrying one camera, I really love having this hand strap because it almost lets it hang in my hand and it just feels so much more suspended. I can kind of prop the bottom of my camera right in kind of the meat of my hand. But the reason for the plate is if I was going to attach this on there without a plate, I would screw it into the bottom of the camera. but this needs to be screwed into the bottom of the camera. So that's why I have both. Two R5s, they're my main camera bodies. I have an R6 and an EOS R as backups. They live in another bag. I don't use them unless one of these, knock on wood, has a problem. Those are my main bodies. My main lenses, I generally use 3 lenses the most. The 24, and they're all RF lenses, just to clarify. I just got my last lens that let me take my last older lens out of my bag. So my main 3 are the RF 24-105 f4, which is, honestly, that lens is so fantastic. I'm debating getting a second one for my camera bag because I use it so much during a wedding day that I'm afraid that if anything were to happen to it, or if I were to drop it, or me being accident prone, will probably drop it or leave it behind somewhere at some point in time. It would be really nice to have another one. My other 2 are the RF 50mm 1.2, which is now my current favorite lens that I've ever used, and the brand new RF 135 1.8. Those are my 3 most beloved lenses. If I were forced to only take 3 lenses to an event, first of all, I wouldn't do that, but those would be the 3 that I would take. They're not the only lenses in my bag. I have a 24mm prime. I'm looking at my bag right now. I have a macro. I have an 85 1.2. I have a 70-200 2.8, but I don't use those as much. Those mostly live in the bag for specialized situations, or if something were to happen to one of my main lenses, I would want to make sure that I have those focal lengths covered. I would say that I probably use the 50 the most during the day. Second, the 24-105, and then the 135. But for the purpose of what I'm talking about today, which is creating portraits using off-camera flash, I think it's most important that you know the lenses that I use the most for those types of portraits. More often than not, 80% of the time, it's going to be the 24-105 f4 is my go-to use an off-camera flash portrait. Now that we've talked about that, I want to talk to you about your lighting options. And what you can't see is what I'm gesturing to is a desk full of lighting options. I could sit here for the next 90 minutes and tell you about different lighting options. I'm not going to do that. There's so many of them, but I'm going to walk you through these. I'm going to hold them up and show them to you. And then I'm going to put up a slide so that you can write them down if you wanted. And the way that I'm qualifying the light that I want to use on a wedding day is how much natural light am I going to have to overpower with this light? For example, a Canon speed light during a reception, fantastic. Night shots, awesome. Overpowering the sun for a family photo of 16 people on the beach at noon in July, that might not be my first choice because it's not going to output enough power as a single light source. So starting from least amount of light to most amount of light, my Canon speed lights, I mean, I've got so many of these. This is the cleanest one, which is why I'm holding it up. It's not duct taped to death and falling apart. But I learned off-camera flash on speed lights. Speed lights are absolutely fantastic. Anyone who tells you that you have to buy something big, fancy, and super expensive to start with off-camera flash is not correct. You can absolutely start with speed lights. On my speed lights, this is a grosser looking older one that has tape all over it. I also have MagMod stuff. It's a very technical term. I have the base MagMod magnet thing so that if I want to diffuse the light, I can pop a diffuser on it. If I want to use a grid, I can pop a grid on it. This is a really easy way for me to modify the light on my speed lights. Put the speed lights down. The way the speed lights talk to my camera is through a transmitter that's on my camera. We're going to get to that. Next step up, after I learned speed lights, and I wasn't really sure where to go, I needed something with more power than a speed light. And I wasn't sure what to buy because I knew I was going to have to step out of the Canon arsenal because that was, I could get a speed light, but I couldn't find a strobe. So I got the very all-sturdy Godox AD200, and I have used this into the absolute ground. Now, you might be looking at this and be like, that's not what an AD200 looks like. You can take off this diffuser, pardon me. You have to change the head on the AD200 to this, right? But then this is I think it's $13, $13 at the most. It's like aluminum, it's got diffusers, and all you have to do is pop this together. Mine's broken, which is why I'm being very careful with it. You can pop a grid in here. There's lots of options. And you just take it and put it right on the top of your light, twist it in, and tighten it down. This gives me more power than a speed light. So if I was going to be outside when I started being out there and realizing, okay, I need to overpower the sun at noon, I started reaching for this thing. It's very reliable, very inexpensive. The transmitter's pretty great. What I like about it is that, you know, like with a lot of other transmitters and receivers, you can dial in the power and it will talk to this. It's really great. Then I upgraded from that to my new beloved, which is the ProPhoto A2. This thing is amazing. It's about the size of a lens. So when I put it in my camera bag, it's probably about the size of my 135 millimeter. What I really like about this is the click system. First of all, you can use it as a video light, not crazy strong, but great for things like ring shots, super up close portraits. But then everything that you would want to put on it, let me set this down, clicks and magnetizes on there. So let's say I want to put a full CTO gel on there. You just pop it on there and it's on there. Let's say I want to put a grid on there. You just pop it on there and it's on there. And much like everything else ProPhoto, it comes with a very sleek and incredible remote that you put on camera, and it allows you to change the output and everything on the flash. So this is now my current beloved favorite. But let me put up the slide so that you can see it. We're going to come over here and we're going to do a lot of screen sharing from here on out, friends. Let me get my keynote. Let me come over here. All right, share screen. Share. I made sure that all of my other screens were closed, so you didn't get to read my emails or anything fun like that. Screen sharing. Full screen. Okay. Whoa. Sorry, guys. Apparently, I don't know how to work a computer. Hang on. There we go. So this takes you back to, if you didn't write down my gear list, the Canon EOS R5, the 24-105, the 50-1.2, and the 135-1.8. Those are the lenses. Here is, let's click over here. Oh, good. I have to hit play. Sorry, guys. There you go. These are the lighting options I was talking about. Starting with the least amount of power would be a speed light. And you have a lot of options for speed lights. If you're a Canon photographer, Canon speed light. Nikon speed lights are great. There are lots of other companies making speed lights. I prefer to stay in the Canon family unless I'm looking for something that Canon does not make. Because I just find that as long as I stay native with bodies and lenses and speed lights, everything works together much more seamlessly. If you want to step up to more power and even more power, you've got the ProPhoto A2, which is what I showed you, the Godox AD200, the ProPhoto, the B10 and B10X Plus. That's going to be my next investment, and I am really, really excited about it. However, if you came here for me to tell you exactly what you need to buy, I can't tell you what it is because I don't know where you live. I don't know what your weddings look like. I don't know if they take place inside or outside. I don't know if it mostly rains where you are. I also don't know what kind of images you want to create. So all I can do here is tell you what I do and give you a lot of options, and then let you take this information and go forth and figure out what works for you. If I were just getting started, first of all, you really can't photograph weddings without a speed light. I would start by getting a transmitter so that my speed light could talk to my camera, and I would just start with the speed light that I already own. Then I would step up to something with a little bit more power. And if I wasn't sure what to buy, I would rent or borrow from friends and test things out until I was sure. Because with all types of gear, lighting gear is expensive. It's an investment. And I can't tell you how many things that I have bought without researching properly. We've all been there. And then only to have it gather dust in my bag and not be something that works a lot for me. So pretty much for any of you who have ever heard me speak, as you hear me speak through the years, and I can't believe I'm saying this, decades of speaking, my gear list has changed. That's because my needs have changed, and also my style as a photographer has changed. So I can't tell you what to buy. All I can tell you is what I use and give you some options. So all the gear is put away. These are other things, though, that you really need to consider, because you're not just going to buy a light and off we go. You have to first think about triggers. How is your light going to talk to your camera? If your light can't talk to your camera can't tell your light when to fire. You need to think about lighting modifiers like softboxes or umbrellas or any type of diffusers, or do you want to do any reflectors? And what about light stands or brackets or batteries or gels or grids? It can start getting very, very, very overwhelming. That's why I like systems like the MagMod system or the ProPhoto Click system, where you know that you can go to one place and be like, okay, with this ProPhoto Click system, I can put on gels, I can put on grids, I can put on barn doors, I can put on a small softbox, and it all clicks with the same adapter. So it's really, really, really easy. Do not make this more complicated than you need to. I say as I look down at my bag that's literally vomiting camera gear right now, but just start really simple, and then you'll start seeing where you're missing things and where you want to add things, and then you can make slow, conscious choices as to what to put in your gear bag next. So what I use, mostly what goes with me besides these lights that you see, I use wireless triggers based on the light that's chosen. Back in the day, wireless triggers, I would have a lot of problems with them interfering with the different types of wireless signals and whatnot. But now they're all so reliable. I can't even tell you the last time I had any interference except at the one wedding where I was trying to fire the same type of light that was in the photo booth, and we couldn't figure out why all of the lights were going off all at the same time. That's a whole different thing. I use really, really, really simple diffusers. Like I already showed you for the MagMod stuff, I just have the MagSphere. For the AD200, I just had that really inexpensive aluminum diffuser. For the A2, I have the click system. I don't have anything crazy fancy. I do have, however, a Bowens mount and a pop-up softbox if I really need to diffuse things down for group portraits, but I don't use that as much as I used to. I have light stands, obviously, because they need to go on something. I have a monopod, and I also have an assistant. I work every single wedding with an assistant, and part of my assistant's job is to carry, hold, and manage the lighting. I'm not a big gel photographer. I know a lot of photographers will use gels to change the color of the background or the color of the sky, but that has never really resonated with me, so I don't do much of that. My favorite modifier are grids. Like if I had to pick one thing to go on one light in my bag, it would probably be this little teeny tiny grid that if I ever lost, I would be very sad. That's reminding me that I need to buy a second one. So we've talked about gear. We've talked about what I have. We've talked about the fact that there are tons and tons of options out there. So let's actually get going and start with the biggest question that I get asked before I even start talking about off-camera flash for portraits. A lot of people want to know, why don't I just use a video light? Like I'm sitting next to my Stella Pro video light right now. It's actually illuminating my face. Why do I not use it very much for portraits? Well, if you think about it, a flash or a strobe, speed light, whatever you want to call it, will freeze your subject. You can shoot at very low shutter speeds. You can really let in a lot of ambient light. You can really keep your ISO really low. When you're working with a continuous video light, you have to think about its ability to freeze your subject. And if you want to freeze your subject with natural light, one thing you have to do is you have to make sure your shutter speed is faster, right? If I'm shooting a subject running towards me with my 135, if I shoot them at a 30th of a second, they're going to be blurry if I'm using natural light or a video light. If I'm using a flash, I can freeze their action. So that's the main reason that a video light is not my automatic go-to in a situation like this. I do have video lights. I do use them on occasion. I'll use them sometimes when I have videographers that I'm working with, and we want to get sort of the same output of light. Maybe they don't have a light that they're using. But for the most part, the video light is sort of a secondary tool that stays in my bag an awful lot. So that's why not video lights. My goal out of all of this, hands down, number one goal is 90% of the time, is to balance the light I make with the ambient light in the space. And to be clear, I don't have a light meter. I'm doing all of this by looking at the internal meter in the camera. And also I'm looking at it with 20 years of experience. And this is what I hate to tell you, is that there is no manual you could read or anything that you can do that will make this incredibly innate right away. I can walk into a room, pretty much easily size up what my settings need to be and what my flash settings need to be. Sorry, guys, I keep kicking the desk. But I couldn't always do that. And even now I make mistakes. I will completely blow an exposure. I will think that my flash needs to be a certain distance from the subject, and it doesn't. So it really does, if you're frustrated with this, if you start doing this and it gets really hard and you're screwing up and you're like, I'm never going to get this, you were me 15 years ago. And you will get it, I promise. And then it will actually become really fun because you can make light anywhere you want. So here are my steps to doing this. Number one, choose your location. And when you're making your own light, you can choose whatever location you want. Staircase, entryway, I could use the backdrop hanging on the wall behind me. I could use the door to the bathroom over there. The options are completely limitless when you're making your own light. So choose your location. And then what I think second is, if I had a window in my hand, or my hand were the sun, where would I want it to come from? And that will guide the placement of my light. So I'm going to take you through a bunch of different scenarios and ways that I set up the light to let you see how I make lighting in different types of portraits. And then we can take a lot of questions, because I know there are a ton of questions already, but let me get through it. So the last thing you want to consider is what your settings are going to be. Now, I can't tell you. I don't know. You might be outside with a speed light in Florida on the beach at noon, or you might be in a reception hall at midnight with high ceilings and no ambient light. There really is no starter or overall general settings to go for. I also don't know if you're trying to let in a lot of ambient light. I don't know if you're trying to cut out the ambient light. But if I had to tell you, if I had to give you a starting place, because people will ask until I give you a starting place to start, whatever light you're using, put it at half power. Go maybe 4 feet from your subject with it. 125th of a second, ISO 400 f4. Will it be exactly what you need? Probably not. But when I'm really not sure, that's a good place for me to start, because it's a fairly average shutter speed, not too fast, not too slow, fairly average ISO, pretty decent f-stop. Light's not blasting, but it's not all the way down. And then from there, you tweak and refine. And I'll talk to you about tweaking and refining as we go through this. This is not the end-all, be-all, single-only setting for your cameras. It is just, when my brain needs a place to start, this is where it starts. So we're going to talk about my first sort of favorite and easiest. We're going to go, I think, from easiest to hardest. Lighting setup, which is light almost in front of the subject. And when I'm talking about off-camera flash, I don't want you to think that that's the only type of flash I use. When I'm photographing people dancing at a reception, I use flash on camera, and it's pretty basic. But for everything else, portraits, first dances, toasts, family pictures, things like that, it's always off camera. And for a good basic flash, barely off and away from your camera, this is my setup. I probably start with the light about 4-ish feet from my subject, and I either step forward or back away from there. And this is kind of the diagram of what it looks like. Although the camera seems very large in this diagram, I don't think it's to scale. So let's talk about what light in front of the subject looks like. So this is a setup that was at a wedding that I shot a couple months ago, and it was really beautiful. Cherry blossoms everywhere, and family photos took place in front of it, and the ceremony also took place in front of it. So when I was doing the family photos, I took a behind the scenes photo of a general okay shot of the space. So after I've chosen my location, my next step is, where would I want the sun to come from, right? And now if you go back to my lighting diagram, you can see I want the sun to come from either off camera left or off camera right, probably about 3 feet from me, 4 feet from the subject. And all I want it to do is illuminate the faces and bodies of my subject. We're not doing anything crazy. So the first thing I will do is I will take a test shot. And the test shot has no flash in it whatsoever. The only thing I'm trying to do in the test shot is establish, once I light my subject, what do I want my background to look like? So I will expose for the background. Now I know by looking at this, if I put subjects in front of that background exposed that way, what's my problem? Well, my subjects look awful. The background looks great, but there's no light on my subjects whatsoever. So ambient light reading, take a shot, put my subjects there. If you need to, take a test shot, put my light exactly where it was in the diagram. These are my settings for here. ISO 320, 125th of a second, f4. Does that look almost familiar? Yes, it does. And that's what it looked like when the flash fired. The obvious next question is, what flash were you using? And this is where I have to say that in some instances, it just doesn't matter. I was indoors. It was raining. I could have used an AD200. I could have used a ProPhoto V1. I could have used a speed light. I'm not going to need a crazy amount of flash output. This one, I believe, was, This was the speed light with the MagMod sphere on it. Remember this one that I showed you, the mag sphere? And I believe my flash was at about 16th power. That's around about where I was there. Because half power, remember my little cheat sheet on starting? Half power was just way too much power. It obliterated the faces of my subject. So ambient reading in the room, test shot to make sure everything looks good, add in the flash. And the only thing my flash is there to do is be my sun, be my window, illuminate my subjects. This is what I'm going for in a situation like that. This is a different scenario. These are almost exactly the same settings. The flash is probably on much higher power because we're outside and the sun is up, but it's in the exact same place as it was in the image before. Same sort of thing. It doesn't matter what lens I'm using. It doesn't matter what the background is. It is the same rinse and repeat. They are there. The light is there. I am here. And all I'm trying to do is fill in the faces on the subjects to separate them off of the background in a really nice, really clean, really easy way. Just like this. And like that. And like that. It was raining behind them. Actually, it started raining on them. That wasn't, I felt bad about that. So let's talk about this, right? This is a lot to take in at once because we're talking about a lot of different settings that you have to make decisions on. In a situation like this, like I mentioned before, I'm almost always using some type of diffuser because I'm close to my subject and I don't want to blast them with an insane amount of light in their face. I want it to be soft. I want it to feather across their features. And so, like I mentioned in that one shot that I was using, this, anything that just diffuses the light just a little bit. Now, then you have to start thinking. Let's say you take your test shot and you're like, this does not look right. In all of these scenarios, let's break down why it doesn't look right. If your light is too hot and way too bright, dial it down. Turn it on, like turn it down to 30-second power, turn it down to whatever you need to do. Or you can back it off. I don't want to frighten anyone by going straight into inverse square law, but if you think about light and you think about the distance that you're holding your light from your subject, every step that you take further away from your subject significantly cuts the amount of light that's reaching your subject. Like 1 to 2 feet away, you've already lost a ton of light. Now, once you get like 15, 20 feet away, it's a little bit less, noticeable. But if your light is way too hot, my first step is actually to turn it down. And then my next step is to have my assistant take a step back. Now, let's say you look at your image and you're like, well, the people look great, but I literally can't see any of the room. The room is really dark. Well, you're not letting in enough ambient light. You can lower your shutter speed. And I can lower my shutter speed all the way down to a 15th of a second because my flash is going to freeze my subjects. Let's say that you have too much ambient light. There's just way too much going on, or you've got ghosting in your image. You can make your shutter speed faster. And these are all things that you can play with. And I have tested all of this over and over again in my home and on friends and on my kids before taking this to a wedding. Let's say your image is just 100% too dark overall. You can raise your ISO. Or if it's too bright overall, you can lower your ISO. So these are the things that you kind of have to keep tweaking, where it's your ISO, it's your shutter speed, it's your f-stop, it's your light power, and your distance of your light to the subject. All of those things are going to combine together to get you to go where you want. And I can't give you a formula for how to get to go where you want. I can just tell you all of the things that you can tweak. And then over time, you're going to start noticing, hey, in these scenarios, I really like to see a lot of ambient light in the room. I like working with a slower shutter speed. My boyfriend's also a wedding photographer. He also uses a lot of off-camera flash. I can guarantee you our settings probably aren't going to be the same thing if we try to shoot the same scene because we might be going for completely different looks. So this is, if you were going to screenshot one screen, this would be the troubleshooting screen. And these are all of the things of like, if this, then that, with all of your lighting. We're doing very well with no coughing. We're going to keep going. Then once I kind of got a hold of, okay, let me at least just like take the flash off the camera and not completely fail. From there, I decided that what I really wanted was a more dramatic light. I want my light to be angled in front of my subject. So as you can see, still disproportionately large camera. Subjects are facing the camera. But the light, which was at a very gentle angle towards them, has now been moved to even more of a strong angle. And if you're watching this on YouTube later, you can rewind, you can look again. But all I'm having my assistant do is move a little bit more this way. So here are a few examples of what that looks like. This is not a professional picture. I took this with my phone. And this is exactly where I was on this exact day at this exact time, right before my clients came out. If you see that tree in the background, there's a lot of twinkle lights on that tree. And I really wanted to make almost a dramatic kind of nighttime looking portrait with really directional light. And this is what it looks like. I can tell you that the light I was using was a ProPhoto B1. And I can tell you that was probably one of the last times I took a ProPhoto B1 to a wedding, because it is an incredible light. I have them in my studio, but it was way more light than I needed on a practical wedding day. It was big, it took up room in my bag. I was always afraid I was going to drop it. So it eventually phased out and became like my prime studio light. But it was probably on one of the lowest powers possible here, because it just throws so much gorgeous light at your subject. You could accomplish this image with an 8200. You could accomplish this with a speed light. I don't want you to feel like you have to own every single light and modifier out in the world. My settings here, ISO 200, 200th of a second at 3.2. Now, why am I at 200th of a second? I'm at 200th of a second because I wanted the lights and everything to be very dramatic, and I wanted less ambient. So if you remember the troubleshooting screen from before, if my image is too bright and I have too much ambient light, what do? Raise my shutter speed, make it faster. So if you look at these two side by side, they're standing on that path in between the two rows of boxwoods with the light behind them. I chose my f-stop so that it would kind of knock out the background, make it blurry. I kept my shutter speed a little faster so that it would cut out the ambient. And then where would I want a window? I would want a window at about a 45-degree angle to my subject. So that's where I placed the light. This is the exact same venue and the exact same trees, just photographed about 3 years later with a slower shutter speed and a twist to the camera. So there are lots of things that you can do once you start kind of mastering your basics of off-camera flash. You can really play around. You're not stuck with the same thing every single time. Any of you who live in New York, you know, this is our nightmare. It is Bethesda Terrace in Central Park. And I think I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people in the background, which means it was a very light day. Usually there's approximately 700,000 people in the background. Do I Photoshop them out? Yeah, usually. Because I just like a nice clean image and people don't pay attention when you ask them to move. But when you look at this really closely, you can see my couple is coming down the steps, and you can actually see my assistant Kelsey walking down the steps, holding up a light with them. This was in my AD 200 days. So what I wanted was a really dark, really dramatic scene, but I wanted the light coming at that almost 45-degree angle. I also didn't want to see Kelsey, because one thing you have to remember if you are using an assistant or a light stand and you have your light close to you, you either need to take a plate shot so that you can Photoshop your assistant out later, or more and more I've been using generative fill in the new Photoshop beta to remove my assistant holding a light if I either forget to hide them behind usually a tree, a bush, or in this instance, a column. So this is what I was going for. I wanted kind of a look of the sun breaking over that railing to the left. I wanted the light coming down on my subject's face. I wanted it to be really dark and moody and dramatic. So I was at ISO 200, 500th of a sec. We're going to talk about high speed sync at f4. The reason I was at 500th of a second, part of it had to do with proximity of subject to camera, ambient light. I wanted to cut out a lot of the ambient. It was a fairly bright day. But if you go back to the image that I shot before this, I put myself in a scenario where if I had shot it at ISO 200, 500th of a second at f4, it would have been very, very, very dark. And then I'm using my flash to add in the light. And I think this was in the AD 200 days. It was probably at either 8th or 16th power based on that day. Here's another example just from the wedding that I photographed the other week in Colorado. I took this very fancy photo on my iPhone. This is outside of the venue at night. This was like a 3-second exposure on my iPhone. But I went out there. partly because I was just wheezing from altitude sickness because I'm not from Colorado and I needed some fresh air. But I went out there and I was looking around trying to come up with some locations that I could do some night shots with the grooms. And I thought, wow, what if I stood outside and put them in that big window at the bottom and lit it from an angle? What would that look like? So this one was definitely the ProPhoto A2, definitely had the grid on it. And this is what I got. Now, with this one, we look at the settings, ISO 800, a 60th of a second. Now, my flash power was really low. It was very, very, very low. My ISO was a little higher than normal, and my shutter speed was lower than normal. The reason those things occurred is because it was virtually dark outside by the time I got the guys to come out. And the sky was pretty much black. So I knew I would have to slow it down a little bit and bump the ISO to get that gorgeous blue sky and to pick up a lot of the details in the building outside. Now, if I use my flash at a high power, it would have completely obliterated the guy standing in the window. So you have to think when you raise your ISO and when you really lower your shutter speed, you're going to want to watch your flash power because more is definitely more in a scenario like that. And I think the first shot that I took with it, I made them ghosts and you couldn't see them at all. So I kept dialing back and dialing back. And my assistant is standing inside. If you're looking at the screen here, she's camera left, right behind that column. And I was talking to her on my cell phone to tell her where I needed her to move. So these are just more examples of that light at a 45-degree angle. Just like that. And that, whether it's outside, inside, in a speakeasy, in a reception room, the light's coming from either left or right at about 45 degrees from my clients. Right there. Now let's talk about troubleshooting this scenario. One of the main things that I started having problems with right away is I would get shadows on the wall. Because the second you go at 45-degree angle, like if I shot at a 45-degree angle, I can reach behind me and touch the wall, right? The reason that the light that's actually on me right now is not making a shadow of me behind the wall is that it's feathered away from the subject. So like if the subject is the water bottle and my flash were like this, turn it like this. So it's just skimming across the face of your subject and not hitting the wall. The other thing you can do, if possible, is move your subject away from the wall. I was talking with my boyfriend about this earlier today. We used to see a cool wall and like both of us would want to like shove our subjects against the wall. You don't have to do that. You can still get the wall if you back out a little bit. And then if you cast a shadow, the shadow is being cast away from the wall and it's not going to hit it. And you're not going to be stuck with that sort of issue that you're trying to solve later. Also, you want to watch for shadows on the faces of your subjects, because if the light does start coming at an angle and your subject is turned and your other subject is turned, you want to make sure one subject isn't blocking the light from the other subject. And don't be afraid to take a shot and go, okay, and then move your subjects. I think a lot of photographers feel like you have to be perfect every time you put the camera to your face, but you don't. You can tweak and you can change and your clients are still going to trust you. It's fine. If the light is too harsh, once again, consider a diffuser of some kind. If light, here we go. We made it almost halfway through. If your light is everywhere, if you look at your image and you're like, wow, I'm getting light on like the wall and light on the floor and light on their bodies, but I really just want it on their faces, consider a grid. Now, let's say you're looking at my photos as examples and you're like, okay, I want to go to, shutter speed 500th of a second. And you take a picture and half of your screen is black and you're like, what have I done? If your shutter speed is over, you have to look at your camera to see what your high speed sync is. If you're over 200th of a second or over 250th of a second, you need to use high speed sync so that your camera and your flash can talk to each other. I use it a lot when I'm in really bright lighting conditions and I really want to cut out the ambient. So I don't, sorry, fruit fly. There are so many parts of this talk that I'm doing that could sidebar into a full one-day workshop. I don't want to linger super crazily on high-speed sync because that'll take us off in another tangent, just like I did not make you do math for the inverse square law a little bit earlier. But look at your flash, look at your camera, figure out how high-speed sync is working, and make sure that if you want to really up those shutter speeds, that you have it turned on. That is something that I almost screw up every time I get a new flash. Now, I did that very quickly so that we can get to my favorite part, light behind the subject. This is my favorite light of all time. Whether it's the sun or light from a venue or a videographer's light, I absolutely love the halo that's created when the light is low and beautiful and behind your subject. This is one of the first things that I actually, when I started to do off-camera flash, it was because I wanted to create kind of an essential golden hour wherever I was. If I wanted the light closer to the horizon, I could bring my light lower. If I wanted my light higher in the sky, I could take my light higher. And this for me was the most exciting one to learn and teach myself. And this continues to be pretty much my most favorite lighting setup. So as you can see, disproportionately large camera aimed at the subjects who are awkwardly staring at each other. And then the light goes directly behind them. And again, for anyone just joining us, I always have an assistant with me. But a lot of times when the light has to go behind my subjects, I can't hide an assistant back there. So we'll put it on a light stand and set it behind my behind my subjects. This is kind of the one time that if I'm going to use a light stand for something like this, that's what I'm going to use it for. So here's an example of how I would use it. This is a very professional photo taken on an iPhone at the William Vale Hotel in Brooklyn, which I love. But I was looking kind of at these weird lights that kind of stripped up and down and all over the walls. And I thought, that is really cool. What if I could backlight my subjects and it would look like that? So the next thing I did was I took a, plate shot, a base shot to see what the ambient would be. And this is what I got. Now we're talking, you can't even tell if I have a subject out there. It's so dark, but I wanted to make sure that my settings were as they needed to be to cut out a lot of the ambient light and to leave those gorgeous light strips on the wall. Then I had my assistant hold a light behind my subject like this. Now, I did not use a grid here. And the reason I didn't use a grid here is because I wanted it to spill around their bodies and light up the wall a little bit. So you can see the light is coming from behind them. It's probably at about chest height. Like if you look down at where the guy's hand is on the other guy's bicep, you can see the light is a touch stronger down there. My goal is to get it as high as humanly possible without letting it spill over kind of where their chests are touching there, because then it's going to flare into the camera. So the light is there. This is what I got. Settings here, ISO 400, 320th of a second, f4. 320th of a second is because I knew light was going to be spilling around, but I wanted to cut out a decent amount of the ambient light and focus on everything else. Another example, same guys, same wedding, poor guys, rained all day long. It was howling wind and rain during their cocktail hour, but we wanted to take some pictures up on the roof with the rain. So we got an umbrella and we went up there and I took a test shot and it was very, very dark. One thing to notice is that those lights in the background, kind of the amber looking lights, were flickering a little bit. So they don't look very strong here. They look a little stronger in the next picture. But what I was trying to do here was get the background dark and get the sky to look like what I wanted it to look like, knowing that I was going to add light behind them. And this is what I got. My assistant is crouched down behind them, aiming the light at them, trying really hard not to get the light to go in their umbrella as much as possible, because otherwise the umbrella would have been completely white. But one thing to note, ISO 200, f1.2, because I really wanted to knock out that background, 250th of a second. Now, I was at 1.2. I couldn't have done ISO 400. That would have been way too bright. So I had to dial down the ISO. And I'm at 250th of a second because I really wanted to freeze those raindrops that were dancing around them. So this is another one of those opportunities to really tweak your shutter speed to get what you wanted. If my shutter speed were slower, I could have done a really cool effect where the rain was maybe streaking behind them. But I wanted it to look like gorgeous little, like almost like fireflies dancing around them. Same scenario, and I promise I don't just shoot this in the rain. I definitely shoot this on regular wedding days. But this was the wedding that I photographed in Colorado. And once the lights kind of went down, this beautiful blue sky and all of those lights behind them, I got a very long lens because I wanted to compress the background away from the subject. And I had my ProPhoto A2 right behind the subjects with the grid on it this time, so that the light would be mostly focused right around those faces. This image here, there wasn't a grid, so there's more light still around them. But this image here, there's a grid, so the light is tighter. And my settings, ISO 400. And at f1.8. So I could go to 400 because I was at 1.8, not 1.2. And again, 250th of a second so that I could freeze those little raindrops dancing around the guys. And again, we're back in the rain. Apparently, I only shoot this scenario in the rain. The couple was standing underneath the overhang right at the edge of their venue, looking out. Light right behind them. No grid because I wanted a bigger spill of light around them to catch the raindrops. ISO 400, f4, 250th of a second. And it doesn't always have to be raining, and you don't always have to be inside. However, unfortunately, in this situation, it was raining. And I sent my assistant and my second photographer outside, one to hold the umbrella over both of them. And I had my light out there on full power blasting through the windows to get this. ISO 400, 125th of a second, f4. And so here are some more examples of the light being directly behind my subject. There was definitely a grid here because you can see there's no spill on the ground and there's no spill around their bodies. There was a grid here. This was just a speed light. Grid, speed light. Gridded, speed light. This was gridded. I think this was the A2. So troubleshooting this type of setup, I almost always use a grid because I want the light to be super tight around my subjects. I want it to be really concentrated. And if I take the grid off, it's for intentional light spill around my subjects. Be very careful about where you aim your light. I try to always have my subjects really close together and the light about as high up as I can go. So for example, let's say I'm turned this way and I'm hugging someone who's like, we're pressed together up here. The light's going to be about here. I'm not saying this is how close it's going to be, but it's going to be about this height. A speed light, I tend to get a little closer to my subjects. A more powerful strobe, I might back it further away from my subjects. But be careful when you're holding the light, don't tip it up too much. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of light in the nose. And that's when you get like the really red, really lit up nose. Be careful about aiming the light at the ground as well, because then it can create this really almost unnatural spill of light on the ground. And that's sort of the most obvious to me indicator that someone's using off-camera flash. You can vary your shutter speed for different effect. Well, let's say you really want to cut out the ambient. You know what to do. We already talked about it. Make your shutter speed faster, remembering high-speed sync. If you really want to let in a lot of the background, a lot of the ambient, slower shutter speed. You can also vary your distance of flash to subject for different effect. White shirts and white dresses also act as reflectors. So this light behind the subject thing is also the way I shoot for stances. So another thing to remember is a high-necked white dress or a man's white shirt or a women's white tuck suit will reflect light back on your subject's face. So the one thing and it's actually funny, my boyfriend's sitting right there. One of the first times we started chatting with each other on Facebook was he was asking me about a lighting scenario exactly like this, wondering how I lit the faces as well. But I didn't. If you look on the ground, you can actually see behind the subjects. You can see my assistant holding a speed light with a modifier on it. You can see her shadow on the ground. The speed light's pointed basically at their shoulder height. And what it's doing is it's hitting the groom's face, it's hitting his white shirt, and it's bouncing back into the bride's face. So consider that your client's clothing might be reflectors as well when you're going for this sort of setup. And then the last one I want to talk to you about is light aimed at the wall. And before you say, what in the world are you talking about? You're not even lighting your subjects. That's the point. I'm lighting the background. Because the last of the 4 ways that I usually light wedding day portraits with off-camera flash is creating silhouettes where there are no silhouettes. Now, when you think about a standard silhouette, you think about something like this, or you think about something like this, where you have an all black, all dark, no light whatsoever subject against a lighter background. Why couldn't I make that with flash? I can. So let's talk about that. Here is a very, very, very dark image on the left, which you can barely see. All I want to do is I want to find a background that is not going to be crazy cluttered so that when I light it up, I can make light behind my subjects, and the exposure difference between my subjects and the background is bright enough to create a silhouette. So when I'm taking my ambient reading of a scene, I want it to be real dark because my subjects have to be pretty much black. Because then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire the light not at my subjects, I'm going to fire the light at the wall. And that's going to create the silhouette for me. ISO 400, 250th of a second at 1.2. Almost all the time when I'm doing a silhouette against a wall, I want my shutter speed to be faster because I'm trying to cut out ambient. And as it gets slower and as it gets slower and as it gets slower, it makes it really hard to keep your subjects being that black, crisp silhouette. Light starts bleeding onto them more and more. Here's another example. This was taken, the bride and groom went into their old college campus for some photos. They're both mathematicians. So they're standing probably about 4 or so feet away from a chalkboard. And my assistant is crouched behind them, aiming the light right at their heads, but at the wall instead. My settings were ISO 400, 2000th of a second at 2.2. Now, if you're looking at my settings and you're like, okay, you could have gone down to ISO 100 and you could have done this with your shutter speed instead. Yes. What I am telling you here, yes, there are a million different ways you can get to the same result. All I can show you is how I get to the same result. And then you start finding, using all of this knowledge, how to get to the same result in a way that feels good for you, the way you like to shoot and the gear that you like to use. This is at Liberty State Park in Jersey City, New Jersey. Golden hour. This was not dark. ISO 400, 1.8. Not really sure why I was still at 1.8 there. 1/1000th of a second. The light is, if you look actually in between their feet down at the bottom, you can see the light stand behind them. And the light is aimed at the wall. This is Ridley Creek State Park. I thought this was really cool. There is absolutely no light on that wall whatsoever. It's, you step down these steps and then you go around a corner and there's a doorway. I thought, oh, that would be so cool if there was really bright light down there. So are you coming around the corner so you can see it? Okay. I am not alone in this room, friends. But I took my light again on a light stand because there was nowhere to hide my assistant behind them in this type of scenario. And it was pointed directly at the wall so that it would light up the wall. ISO 200, 1/1000th of a second at 2.8. Same scenario, light right at the wall behind them. Now, troubleshooting this kind of setup. In this one, your ambient needs to be almost flat black, like no ambient at all or very, very minimal, or else you're not going to get that sharp silhouette once you shine the light on the wall. The other thing is be mindful of all of your body parts and the sculptural shapes they're making. If you have your subjects kiss and you look at their silhouette, it looks like you've mushed two body parts together. You can't see where one face ends and one face begins. So just be very mindful about body positioning. For example, if I've got a couple facing each other, I never have one person put their arms around the other person's neck, because if the second they do that, it looks like they've got, poles going through someone's neck. So if I think about their body parts as sculptures, that helps me a little bit more when posing a silhouette. Generally, I don't use a lot of modifiers here. I'm pretty much going bare light against the wall. A grid is going to make it a little bit too tight. And if you don't have high speed sync and you're in this scenario, again, this could be a whole nother class entirely, you can lower your ambient by adjusting your ISO or your f-stop. So the goal of all of this, what is the goal of all of this? Is so that I can do multiple setups and multiple different looking photos in the same location in a minimal amount of time, because we all know we have no time on a wedding day, no matter what. So multiple setups in the same location could look like a speed light directly behind my subjects, but then I move so that I let the speed light flare into the camera. Same setup, two different kind of looks. I could be at the Beekman Hotel shooting across the atrium, and I could turn the light around and aim it at the wall. And then I could have my client stay in the same spot and just have my assistant turn the light around and aim it at my subjects instead. This is the same wedding, the same clients, the same day, the same portrait session, just 15 seconds apart. I could put my clients out on the end of a pier and shoot with a long lens at 1.8 and do the very first lighting setup where it's barely off camera. And then I could change my setup, and I could change my lens, and I could move my light to where it's at a 45-degree angle and get a very different look without leaving the same scene. Or I could be on the beach with my clients apparently there's just terrible weather in all of the photos that I'm showing you today. I could be on the beach with my clients on a day that there's almost a hurricane. Lighting setup number 1, almost directly in front of them, longer lens. Then I take a step back, get a wider lens, move the light to lighting setup number 2, and have a very different looking image in the exact same scene. All right, I am going to stop my screen share, go over to my face. I've talked at you for almost an hour straight. I know that is a lot of information. I'm really glad that Adorama is recording this. I'm glad it's going to be on the YouTube channel. And what I really hope that you guys don't feel is that I haven't given you enough formulas. I hope I've given you enough of an overview and an idea of lighting and settings and placement so that you can start with what you've got now and you can start making it your own and kind of figuring your own way through it. So with that said, my friends on the other side of the Zoom, do you have any questions for me?
Okay, I'm going to jump back in here and join you.
Yay! Come back in. Hey, we missed you. I was out here on my own for an hour. Welcome back.
You were crushing it. I was listening intently. So, so we do have some questions that we had come in that were submitted ahead of time. I'm going to go over some of them, the ones we didn't hit. And so, I guess first and foremost, high-speed sync usages, advantages, disadvantages, why when you would want to use it.
Yeah. When I really need to cut out ambient and I need to get my shutter speed really high, let's say I want to shoot at f2 in the middle of the day, or I mean, really any of a million different scenarios where the shutter speed needs to also be an element that I use to cut out ambient light. If I can't use high speed sync, I'm not going to be able to get to where I want to go.
Awesome. Another question, do you ever use continuous light for off-camera camera portraiture? Sorry.
I do. Yeah, I do. Just generally not at weddings. My off-camera like video light work, like with my Stella right here, we're basically sitting in the setup that I use right now for portraits in the studio. But for weddings, again, like I said before, with moving subjects, it's really hard to freeze them with a light that isn't going to freeze their movement. And for that reason, that's why I tend to prefer flash, but there are a lot of people who do beautiful work with video light. It's just not kind of my first go-to.
Awesome. In what scenarios would it be better to use on-camera flash compared to off-camera flash?
It's all about the angle of light. Seriously, like that's for me, that's exactly what it comes down to. If I want light straight at my subjects from straight right where my face is, there's no point in taking the flash off the camera. It can stay there. But for the most part, I want a more angular look to my light, so I'm not going to get that with it on camera. But I do use on-camera flash for almost all reception party dance photos because that's the look that I'm going for in that scenario.
Yeah, especially because it helps you get in much closer to the action that's happening, right?
Absolutely. And people think, I haven't quite figured out how to have someone follow me around with an off-camera flash without people looking at the off-camera flash instead of like, they're like, what is that? And I'm like, please don't do
that. Okay, so I think, yeah, we've already covered how they control the balance of the background and the subject. You've done that pretty extensively. How do you gauge the power of your off-camera lighting? And how do you know how powerful of a flash you need to get the shot?
That's a really tough one. And honestly, that's the one where it's kind of like your mileage may vary. I started with a speed light because I knew what the output was going to be all the time. And it was the flash that I knew. And I was kind of able to meter it based on my brain because it's what I'd learned on. But now when I figure out what light I'm reaching for, I'm looking at what kind of light I'm going to have to overcome with it. So mostly what I've got going on right now is the A2 and the speed light. The speed light is when I need less light. The A2 is when I need more light. And I gauge how much light I need by first of all getting my ambient reading of the scene and then adding in my flash. And you know, somebody's going to write a nasty YouTube comment about this one, but I just look at it.
Yeah.
There are a lot of ways you could go about pulling out light meters and figuring out things. or I could take a quick test shot and look at it. And the great thing about kind of going that way is the more you do it over and over and over again, you're going to start realizing that your test shots are getting closer and closer to exactly where you want them to be.
Yeah.
And then you can start shooting reactively, which is really nice. But again, as with all things, it just takes experience and practice, but then it gets really fun. I promise it gets really fun. Like, I swear.
I agree with you. I agree with you. It does get fun. Okay, let's see. How do you use flash with second curtain sync?
That's a really good one. I use flash with second curtain sync in the studio for sort of creative portraits with dancers and theatrical work. I don't use it at weddings, not because I don't think there's a practical application for it, but just the portraits that I'm generally trying to make, that wouldn't be something that I would use to get to that end result.
Excellent. All right, so we do have some questions coming in the chat. So I'm just going to reiterate again, if you're in the YouTube channel and you're logged in, please submit your questions in the chat so we can have them answered here live right now. I'm going to finish the list that we had though. And
that's fine with me. I like this. This is fun.
Excellent. Excellent. I love it. Let's see. Is there any, what's your bare minimum number of flashes and lenses you take for a wedding? So big, small, what is your preferred gear?
All right, I'm going to look down at my bag right now and I'm going to tell you. So I generally carry, I either carry one massive bag with me with everything in it, or I break things down into two bags where I've got like my main bag and my backup bag. So I'm looking at my main bag right now. I've got 2 speed lights, my old 8200, a Profoto A2, 2 EOS R5s. Hang on a second. We're going to, wait, you asked, we're going to look.
Yeah, okay. No, I love it.
Okay, we've got a 16mm prime. I basically use it for 2 shots a day, and that's room shots. It's fine. It wasn't a lens, I swear. It was just like an adapter. My 24mm prime, which is by the time dancing, thank you. By the time dancing rolls around, could I shoot it with a 24-105? Absolutely. Is the 24 prime a lot lighter? Yes, it is. Do I write labels with a Sharpie on my gear? Yes, I do. Also in here we have, this is labeled the Tiny 50. Because the 50mm is such a staple of how I shoot. I have the 51.2, but then I also have the 51.8, which is a remarkable, inexpensive, fantastic lens. My 100mm macro, 24-105 f4, 135 1.8, and in my backup bag I have a 35 prime, a 70-200 2.8, 85 prime, 70-200 2.8. I think that's it.
Okay, I'm gonna ask.
But the main ones, the big ones, the biggies are the 24-105, the 135, and the 50.
If you only could pick one, what would it be?
The 50.
The 50. Excellent.
And I can't believe I'm saying that, because if you ever look at any of my old education, I was like, I don't like 50mm, but that RF 51.2 has just, it is so quickly become a staple in my bag that I can't make that look with any other lens.
Yeah, and then you combine that with the eye detection, in-body image stabilization, the R5, the R6 series cameras, and it's just like such a beautiful combination. Somebody in the chat earlier mentioned that they use a 50mm for low light band photography, and
yes,
so it just serves so many purposes. It's a great portrait lens, great low light, combined with that autofocusing and the in-body image.
It's just really special. Like, it's just a really special lens. And now that I have the 135 1.8, I currently have no requests, but I'll probably come up with something else that doesn't exist. But I've got a bag of gear that, like, I don't have needs. Like, it is fitting all of my needs, and it's right with my style of photography, and everything's fantastic. So very pleased with it.
That is amazing. Because you mentioned the 8200 and the Profoto A2, there was a question that says, what if I want to use the 8200 and the Profoto A2 at the same time?
I can honestly tell you that I don't know. I used to use, like, back in the day, I would use Photic transmitters and receivers, and it didn't matter what you were putting them on. Like, you could put them on any light that would take them and it would fire them. I don't know if there's any type of universal trigger that would let you cross-platform like that. I don't know. That's partly why I'm kind of phasing out. The Godox was like the 8200 was the thing that I bought when I needed a step up from a speed light. But now that I'm figuring out more about the ProPhoto lineup of things and phasing all of that back together, it's important to me that all of my lighting stuff is very similar so that it can all talk to each other to avoid situations such as such. So I can't say you can't do it, but if you can do it, I don't know how you do it.
Fair enough.
If you find out how to do it, please tell me. I would love to know.
Right? Send a message. Okay, I think you may have already answered this, but let's just cover it again just to make
That's
sure.
fine.
How to only meter the light from the flash. So say in a studio or outdoors, how would you do that?
With my eyes. And again, that's I find that if I, like, part of why I didn't like light meters is because they took a lot of, and this is just me, and I'm not saying that I've never used a light meter. It took a little bit of kind of the human element out of it. I was just looking at the math and the numbers of such. When I first started trying to meter a flash outside, I legitimately took a human head mannequin and put it on a tripod and took the flash and then backed it off and backed it off and backed it off and backed it off and moved it around so that I could see how the power was cut and practically what it looked like. And that to me was the more helpful way to meter it, was just fire it and look at it.
Yeah. So there was a little bit of conversation happening in the chat earlier about like family is also really great models to sit for you. My friends, I torture them all the time with speed lights. And
I went with the mannequin on a stand because my kids were teenagers at about this point, and that didn't work. But if you do get a mannequin and you do put it on a stand, do not leave it in your car, or else it will melt and it will really scare you when you come back to the car after a wedding.
Yeah, that is a great tip. But yeah, I would say, and anytime you can get out and just shoot, I think, and also keep in mind with ETTL, if that's what you're using, you want to expose for the background first, and then use the ETTL as a fill, and make sure you're tied to that metering mode and your focusing point. So evaluated metering is always tied to the focusing point. So then wherever you put that will tell the flash how much output. So I'll just throw that in there as a little tip as well.
Well, and a little tip on top of that is when I got started first learning off-camera flash, ETTL, just like we're talking 20 years ago, was confused as to what I was doing. So everything I did was manual, and now everything I do is manual. But ETTL, especially on the Canon speedlights now, has gotten so good.
Yeah.
That sometimes if you want to meter, I'll use ETTL and see what it outputs, and then take that output and put it in as manual.
That's a great point. I like that. I'm going to use that.
And I like manual because you always know what you're going to get every single time. But ETTL, and I've tried that on ProPhoto gear before. ETTL is, what does ProPhoto think I should be doing? And then I would look at it and be like, that's pretty close. Dial it into manual, and then you get the same thing every time.
Right. And then it stays consistent, and it's not, you're not at the mercy of the focusing point. So if it's too bright or too dark, it's not going to do too much output.
Exactly.
Okay. So before I dive into some of the businessy how-to day of stuff, I'm going to dive into the questions that came in the chat. And so any thoughts about using filters to diffuse light into dark when the, let me try it. I didn't read that. Let me see if I can.
Totally fine.
Any thought about using filter to diffuse light in dark when the camera flash is pointed at the camera? So anything about using a filter, I'm assuming like a neutral density, maybe somebody can clarify in the chat for me, but they're asking about using filters to diffuse the light in dark when the camera is the flash is pointed at the camera. So
I do have a neutral density filter that I use on my 51.2 every once in a while when it's like crazy bright outside and I want to shoot at 1.2. But yeah, if whoever wrote that question could rewrite that question, I would love to answer it.
Yes, I should have read the whole thing first. Okay, so any tips for light placement for preventing shadows on the ground when having a flash facing in front, 45 degrees to subject, etc.?
If I can get closer to my subject with the light, it's going to stay more on this part of their bodies. The further I get away and the more the light is just flying everywhere, then it starts spilling all over the place. But if you really want your light to be more focused on your subjects, I would suggest trying a grid. And that will really help narrow that light down and reduce spill on things like walls and floors and grass.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. All right. So any recommendations for off-camera travel lighting to keep the weight and the size down?
Yeah, definitely. Speed lights are great. I absolutely love speed lights. Like you can do, I feel like there's just a misconception that you can't do as much with off camera with speed lights because they're like, oh, they're not strong enough. They totally are. A speed light at full power is a pretty freaking powerful piece of light. But if you do want to step up to something that's literally the size of a lens, this Profoto is fantastic. It's light. It literally sits down in my camera bag like a lens. So if I was traveling, I would probably bring a speed light and this. And it would be light. It would be, I mean, as light as any gear can be, minimal and really easy to pack. And both are very versatile. So that's probably what I would do.
Excellent. All right. So somebody asked, how do you keep your lights dry when it's raining? Since you showed us all these awesome rain shots.
Well, usually I'll have my assistant put it on a stand and hold an umbrella over it. That's mostly what it is. Or sometimes, and please don't tell the manufacturers, just Canon, don't listen, Profoto, turn your ears off. Sometimes I'll literally just toss it out in the light for a few seconds, take a couple of shots, and then pull it back in and towel it off. I could pretend that we all take really good care of our gear and protect it from the elements all the time. You know we do not. If I'm going to have somebody out there for a while, we are going to take an umbrella, put it on a light stand. My assistant's going to like huddle over it. But sometimes we'll pop it out there, fire a couple of frames, and pull it right back in and clean it off.
Yeah, for sure.
They can, I mean, honestly, like these speed lights and whatnot, they can take a lot of abuse. And I'm not saying don't take good care of your gear, but you don't have to be afraid of it in the weather the way that you used to be.
I agree. Definitely there's a little bit more weather resistance and that sort of thing on a lot of the products. I mean, especially for the Canon side of things, if you're using like a 600 or an EL1 especially, I mean, that thing is built to withstand a little bit of the raindrops that you're going to be outside, because you're not going to be outside. That couple's also not going to want to get soaked, right? Nope. So like they're going to want to have to get back inside eventually. So you're probably only out there for a shot or two. I
mean, we're talking 5 minutes at the most when it's raining that hard. But even otherwise, like I just don't want these sessions to take too crazy long. I don't want to pull people away from receptions or things like that for night shots. But yeah, I've definitely had my speed lights out in some conditions.
Yeah.
And they're all still working incredibly well. Very durable.
Excellent. Okay, so we got a little bit of an better understanding. They're coming from France, so that's their English is a little bit,
of course,
totally understandable. So their question is more about the effect, your filter, like the effects you can make, like with flare with a flash, when it's pointed at the camera. Got it now. Yes.
That's a great question.
Yes.
I really like in golden hour and blue hour when the sun is coming down really low. And if you move your head and the clients move their head, you get the light that and it flares around. Yes, there are definitely times that I will have my light flare between my subjects or behind their backs or over their shoulders or things like that. I don't do anything special or above and beyond I don't add any filters or anything to enhance or decrease that effect at all. I just try to make sure that the light's not shooting straight into my camera, that it's coming at maybe a touch of an angle from behind one of their faces, so that it does look a little bit more like setting sun and a little bit less like I shone a flashlight straight at the camera.
Excellent. So again, I'm just going to reiterate, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. If you're on YouTube, you got to log in, get that in the chat. I see a few comments asking about if this is going to be available for replay, and it will. You'll be able to watch this again. So if you missed something or you just want to review it, it'll be available coming at you. So somebody in the chat said, I buy a pack of 25 clear rain curtains, or shower curtains, sorry, rain curtains. I guess they become rain curtains. Keep them in their light bag just in case it rains, so that there's protection over things.
That the last wedding that I photographed when it started raining, I actually took an umbrella and jammed it down the back of my shirt and held it in place with my harness. So we get real crafty, as you can see.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. And then, sorry, I'm saying, of course, I'm responding to the chat just in case anybody's wondering. I'm seeing
You're
the comments.
fine.
So, okay, I think right now, I have everything in the chat covered. So we're gonna
Okay.
jump into if anybody has anything else. Oh, what was the name of the travel light you suggested? Just a speed light you had kind of, or
Yeah,
the pro
just a
photo.
speed light. Yeah.
I think they're
A
talking
lot of
about.
times when I'm traveling, I'm not going to try to do anything super crazy or heavily high powered. So a speed light is it's an amazing travel tool, and you don't need to bring crazy extra stuff with it at all. So, and I don't want to give the impression that, you have to have something more than a speed light to make dramatic images. A solid half, if not more, of what I showed you today were speed light images.
Yes. I think the question they were asking was the pro photo that you showed that you said was like a
Oh
lens.
yeah, the little baby, the
Yeah,
A2, the BB.
that one. What
And you
model is
could
that?
take this off if you really wanted to, but it's really nice to I also kind of just use that as a handle. But just show it to you next to my speed light. This is the 600 EX2 RT. That's them next to each other. But this is definitely on it. Like if I'm traveling, this is what I'm going to take because it's just so versatile for so many different reasons. I would probably go with the speed light first, but
Okay.
that's pretty cool.
And you're using the 600 EX2 RT? Are you using
Yes,
EL1?
because I do not like change and don't like to buy new things. So I've been dragging these things around for a hot minute and they are fantastic and you cannot kill them.
Valid. So somebody just asked what speed lights do you use? So this using the 600 EX2 RT from Canon. There's also an EL1 now. And if you're on one of the newer cameras with the multifunction hot shoe, there is the EL5 available.
Yeah, you're like, Susan, that is a very old flash. And I'm like, yes, it is.
Okay, you know what? Stick with what you know, right? So Enrique, I didn't miss your question. You had said me right before I caught it. So do you use more than one light sometimes? Because I know a lot of
sometimes. Yeah, not a lot. Most of the time it's one light. If I do bring in a second light, it's because I want to both front and backlight my subject, but it's a very, very rare occurrence.
Awesome. Excellent. Okay, if anybody asked another question in the chat and I missed it, now that time I don't know if anybody else had it. So please put it back in the chat, hit me again. Let me know that in the chat comments that I missed you. And then we're going to jump over to some just like day of stuff, or you okay with
that? Why
not? Excellent.
Absolutely.
Okay. So for your wedding gigs, how do you lower stress during the day? Is that possible?
Funny question. There's one of the phrases that I was taught when I very first went into business is it's not personal, it's just business. And by that, I mean, I can only get so emotionally involved on a wedding day before it starts to become at the expense of my own mental health. And that is not to say that I don't care. I care very much. I care almost too much. I want every day to go perfectly, both photographically and for the clients and for their families and for their friends. But if I get twisted up in knots about late timelines and, the stress of family and all of that, first of all, you can see it on my face. I cannot hide it from my face at all. My clients will feel it. I will exude a stressed energy. And whether they can tell it or not, it's going to just make it worse. So I just try to remind myself that the best thing that I can do to combat stress is to be a source of calm and good vibes. So I try to put more of that out there. And I can't tell you that the more that I try to do that, the more my clients at the end of the day are like, your vibes were so good. It felt so good to be around you. So almost like a fake it till you make it sort of thing. And just remember, if you start going in a stress spiral, you're not going to get out of it and it's not going to make anything any better. Just take a second to stop and breathe and triage your problems and be like, okay, I'm not going to think about the fact that we're running this late and this is happening and now it's raining and what am I going to do about this? Let's think about the next 10 minutes and what can we do to make the next 10 minutes calm and easy for everybody? And let's do that. And then go home and sleep for 14 hours and do nothing for the rest of the next day. Yeah.
Exactly. I will also just kind of add to that too is know your gear. Know your gear
100%.
in and out for sure.
And that's, honestly, photographically, that's the thing that like the experience that you can't teach it. You just kind of have to keep doing it. I still get stressed about gear and I still mess up settings, but it does get a lot easier when all of that stuff becomes innate, and people dealing also becomes innate too.
I agree. Okay, so how do you manage creating beautiful pictures on a busy wedding day when you're pressed for time?
I am always pressed for time. We are always pressed for time. I will always have more ideas than the amount of time I have with my subjects, no matter how much time I have. I just think methodically, one spot to another spot. And again, like we were just talking about, the innateness of the gear. Once you get your lighting setups and everything to a place that you're really comfortable with them, then you can just create freely, even under a tight timeline. But if you're not in that kind of place yet, make yourself a little cheat sheet. Like if I have 10 minutes, these are the things I want to do. If I have 20 minutes, these are the things I want to do. And it will give you some ideas. I almost want to say like a formula for yourself to follow that will give you a little bit of comfort. And then over time, you're going to realize that you are, off-roading from that formula and creating in real time. And that's when the amount of time that you have for your subjects almost doesn't matter, because I can make something good in 5 minutes. I'm going to be exhausted at the end of the 5 minutes, but I can still do it because I don't have to think, oh my gosh, what am I going to do here? So a little cheat sheet might be a little helpful.
Yeah, I mean, and so have you ever done I know for me, when I've done weddings, hasn't been often, it's been a very long time, but having like a shot list, like working with the couple of who they want in the day of, like what kind of groups of people, that sort of thing, that helps eliminate as well.
Family shot list, always. But if coming up with a shot list for the couple makes you feel more comfortable and more in control, there's nothing wrong with that at all. You could say like, okay, I've got 20 minutes with them and we're in this barn. I want to go to this spot and do these things. And then I want to go to this spot and do these things. And then if I have time, we could go to this spot and do these things. And then if you see something along the way, you're free to do it, but it makes you feel less panicky going into it. It just helps.
Yeah, I know for me, I love structure when I'm on those type of days because I know how chaotic my brain is. And I'm like, squirrel. So like I see something, I'm like, oh, that lighting is really cool. Oh, this is really cool. And it's like you need to stick to the plan first and then you can get all the other stuff, right? So
100%.
Yep. Okay, so another question was, when you're editing black and white photos, what are basic guidelines that you follow to get the most out of the shot?
I don't. So when I give my images to my clients, I deliver everything in color and in black and white. So when I'm photographing, I'm thinking, how will this look in color? And then it's all to me just about the lighting and making sure the balance of highlights and shadows are really well handled. And then whether you're treating it, leaving it a color image or turning it black and white, you'll have all of the qualities that you need there to make either one look good.
Awesome. Another question was, how do you get more clients? Is that yeah.
Oh, Lord.
I think that just comes with time.
Right? It does come with time. There are absolutely things you can do, but word of mouth is, much as I dislike it, it's the best one. It means you have to get to know people. You have to talk to people. You have to people with people, which I'd like to just live behind the computer screen all day, but you can't do that. Word of mouth, working with the SEO on my website so that it's really optimized for Google. I get a very large percentage of my clients from Google searches. So I work really hard on that. Maintaining a constantly updated portfolio, taking really good care of my clients. That's absolutely invaluable. Talking to everybody I meet about what I do, and maintaining social media. Except I'm not going to do TikTok. I just can't do it.
I mean, but that's just a lot. That's a lot.
It's a lot. And just keeping at it. And the best way to get more clients is just keep practicing, keep getting people in front of your lens, even if it's friends, even if it's family, keep sharing the work. Oh, hi. And so we had a puppy escape. Hold on. If you want to catch her, we can show everybody the puppy. Yeah. I live upstairs from my studio. And if the door opens up, hey, can she say hi? It's Taylor Swift, the dog. Oh, Taylor Swift is made of spice and fire and insanity. And she just got a haircut and she also just escaped.
Oh my goodness, so cute.
You want to answer questions or do you want to go back again? Okay, bye. My daughter just came running, was like, oh no, we lost one. They are escape artists. They like to get out of the door and come running to see what's going on in the studio.
They got to be involved, you know?
I heard the little feet coming a mile away.
Another question came in the chat. I think we kind of already answered this, but just to kind of reaffirm it, do you combine lights ever, pro photo and speed lights? No.
Not usually. I almost barely ever combine lights. And if I do combine lights, it's generally 2 speed lights. But for the most part, I don't. The look I'm generally going for is a 1 light setup. And that's at weddings. At the studio, I'll do multiple different lights. But at weddings, it's generally just 1.
Excellent. Okay, I think we've covered everything.
Oh my gosh.
I know, we came to the end. We made it there.
We did.
There is no additional questions that come in the chat. So now is the time if you're going to do it, type fast. And that's, I think that's what we have. So
yay.
Thank you so much.
I like that the dog waited until the very end to escape. It was very considerate timing.
Came to say goodbye. The Adorama events in the chat says we love a surprise puppy on the stream. They can't go wrong.
Listen, if you Zoom, you have to pay the puppy tax, which is you've got to show your pets. Like, it's just how it works.
You know what? We're all happy for it. So, okay. So thank you for making our night with puppy tax and with your excellent presentation and all the answering questions.
Yeah. And if anyone needs anything, like my Instagram, Susan Stripling Photography, you can always just drop me a DM. Show me an image if you need help. It's a crazy thing trying to figure out off-camera flash. Yes. So anything I can do to make your off-camera life a little easier, I'm glad to help.
Excellent. And then, because you just touched on that, and I meant to, you reminded me, somebody in the chat earlier had asked about, how do they find out more? Like, are you doing photo walks? Are you doing workshops? Where do they go to find that information? Is it just Instagram, website?
Most everything's on Instagram. You can also go to my website, susanstripling.com. The past couple of years, I've been sort of light on education, but I'm looking forward to getting a little bit more back into it post-pandemic, little breathing room.
Yeah.
This is really making me want to get off Zoom and go see people in person some more. So yeah, Instagram and website are probably the best ways.
Excellent. All right, guys.
Yeah.
So thank you. And that's
anytime.
That's everything, right?
Yeah. I always like talking to you guys. So if anyone wants any more of this expanded on, I'm always glad to come back.
Excellent. Yes. So the chat just asked, do you do workshops? Just check out her website, check out Instagram. Anything will be posted there if and when. Fingers crossed, it sparks whatever that future looks like. So
yeah. Sounds good to me. Do this anytime.
Excellent.
Thank you guys so much. Now I have to clean up the camera bag because I took everything out. I took everything out of it and then just sort of laid it on top of it. So I might just go to dinner first and then think about the camera bag.
That right now. Yeah, that's the ADD going on. You're like, I'll do this later. It's fine. And then
adult ADHD is a real thing that TikTok has taught me about. So
we're just
gonna do that later. Anytime you guys want me back, I'm glad to come back.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for tonight. It was
Thank you so much. It was lovely to see you.
Yes, you too. Hopefully I'll see you again in the future at another trade show.
Another trade show.
All right.
Bye, everyone.